Before we start, I just wanted to say to Luke and the University of Maryland, thank you for inviting us. We are incredibly excited and grateful for being asked to share this webinar with you today. Some advance warning, we are going to ask for some low-key audience participation a few moments throughout the presentation, so please don't be shy. Together, we're going to explore key aspects that will help you to understand what makes a good wildlife fence and explain how this significantly helps to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, as well as improving wildlife connectivity across transport networks when fencing is used in combination with wildlife crossing structures. First off, we'll give a brief introduction into road ecology, explain the reasons why wildlife fencing is used, and then highlight the issues with current approaches and applications. We'll then explore the 4 key factors that we believe need to be considered to make good wildlife fencing. First, we'll highlight the importance of collecting data. Second, we'll give an insight into how assembling a team of professionals and stakeholders to collaborate and support a project is essential, along with looking at ways to obtain funding. We'll then look into the details of fencing design and considerations that need to be made during installation. And finally, we'll talk about how wildlife fences should be maintained and monitored to ensure their long-term effectiveness. Now, the outcomes learned today will provide you with a toolkit that you can apply on your own projects and then share with colleagues and partners. Now, although there are a lot of references and images we'll share today are focused on small animals, the principles still apply to large animals such as deer, bear, and elk. As I said, we'll stop for a Q&A at the end, so please make any note of questions as we go, and if there are some questions that are relevant, we will kind of interrupt and address those. But so first off, to kick things off, we wanted to start with a little exercise. So if you're able to, using your mobile device, can you please scan the QR code on the screen? Or if you're using a browser or aren't able to do that, you can visit slido.com and then please input the code there, 1880536. And you will be met with 3 different multiple choice questions. And what we want to know, or what you think, is what do these numbers represent? And we're just going to kind of give this 30 seconds or so. Don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but give you folks a chance to have a little look and let us know what you think. And then we will dive straight into the answers. You can see we got 3 participants responding.
Just got mine in, Steve. And for anybody in the audience who's wondering how to do this, if you just take your phone and hold it up and take a picture, as if you're going to take a picture on that little QR code in the top left, it will, on my phone at least, it pulls up a little link and I click it and it'll take me right to it. And there's three questions you can answer on there. I just put in mine.
Okay,
I got a few wrong. Looking forward to seeing what this is.
We're not trying to trick you. So we've got 13 people who've done it so far. How many? We've got 61 participants here. So yeah, we'll just understand some of you may have limitations due to kind of work computer permissions if you're there. So we do apologize for that. I mean, you are more than welcome to just throw some thoughts into the chat, although it might not work as seamlessly as this. So we'll kind of, continue with this. I'm trying to see if...
Oh, is that 26 participants in the top right? Is that what that is?
Yep, 28.
Cool.
So yeah, we thought 30 people gone through, a couple of people actually actively doing it.
Cool.
Looks like it's slowed down a little bit. Okay, so we'll leave it there. Oh, one more participant responding. So let's have a look at what people have responded. So yeah, the first question was 350 million. What does this number represent? The correct answer is there in green, which 74% of answers came back correct, which is the number of vertebrates that are killed annually on roads in the USA. Quite staggering. 440. So the majority of people got this answer wrong. So 440 is the number of human fatalities caused by wildlife vehicle collisions annually in the USA. And then 80,000, again, just 24% of people getting this answer correct, is actually the average cost of mitigation, meaning wildlife fencing and crossing structures for small animals. So just to kind of pull all of those answers together on one slide, 350 million estimated number of vertebrates killed on US highways annually, 440 human fatalities due to wildlife vehicle collisions in the USA annually, and $80,000 is the average cost of a crossing structure and fencing for small animals, such as typically installed for reptiles and amphibians. Now, the cost for larger wildlife crossing structures and bridges is much higher, but $80,000 just shows you actually how cheap mitigation can be for small animals. Now, these are some pretty hard-hitting numbers, so while they sink in, we're just going to show you a short video that explains a bit more about wildlife vehicle collisions, wildlife fencing, and wildlife crossing structures, and then afterwards we'll dive straight into the specific details that will help you to understand what is needed to implement better wildlife fences. So hopefully the sound works with this for you.
When you're driving down the highway, it's hard to avoid a deer because you never know when it's coming. By the time you do see it, it's often too late. But what if there were crossings for animals just like the ones used by humans? In some places, planners have built exactly that. And data shows that animals are using them, which means that close calls like this are far less likely to happen. Hitting an animal is a risk anywhere roads are built through animal habitats. And as more roads are built, there are more opportunities for collisions. According to a 2008 study commissioned by the US Congress, the number of animal vehicle collisions was increasing. Experts blamed the rise on more vehicle miles traveled combined with a growing North American deer population. But the official tally excludes accidents that have less than $1,000 in property damage. If you account for minor collisions, unreported accidents, and other variables, experts estimate at least 1 million collisions with large animals, meaning deer, elk, and moose, occur every year in the United States. And while animal vehicle collisions rarely cost lives, they do cost money. In the US, wildlife vehicle collisions cost over $8 billion every year, money that is spent on vehicle repairs, medical costs, and other expenses. And although humans tend to survive, animals often get killed. In the same report, researchers found that vehicular traffic threatened 21 endangered species, including the bighorn sheep. In some places, highway planners have solved the problem by building fences to keep animals off the road, a relatively cheap solution that has been proven to reduce roadkill by over 50%. But although fencing reduces roadkill, it neglects a wider problem. Besides the risk of collision, roads harm animals by dividing wildlife populations and limiting their ability to find mates, food, and other necessities of life. In Canada, wildlife scientist Tony Clevenger has been studying how road construction affects animals in Banff National Park.
It can have important impacts on the reproductive success because females aren't being able to access important spring habitat because they're not crossing the highway. So it's important that we maintain these movements and we maintain this access to the important biological resources throughout the year. And wildlife crossing structures do that.
Beginning in the 1980s, authorities began installing a system of underpasses and overpasses in Banff. The structures were designed for animal use only and were located where animals were likely to cross the road.
The data speaks for itself. For example, here on the Trans-Canada Highway in Banff National Park, there were on average more than 100 elk vehicle collisions per year before the fencing and the wildlife crossing structures, and now it's down to less than a half dozen. So these are huge reductions by having these mitigation measures in place that are improving motorist safety, they're saving lives, and also in a protected area like Banff National Park, it's important because the objective of this national park is to protect wildlife.
Instead of blocking the road entirely, planners used fences to funnel wildlife towards the crossing structures, which were planted with native vegetation. A few species, like deer, elk, and moose, immediately started using them and were followed by more skeptical species, like wolves and grizzlies. Within a few decades, even the most reluctant species, like lynx, had adapted to using the crossings. In 2012, a male grizzly was recorded crossing the structures 66 times in one summer. By crossing the highway, the bear's habitat expanded to include potential mates on the other side of the road, which decreases the likelihood of inbreeding.
What we've been able to show is that by having these overpasses and underpasses in place, we've restored genetic connectivity across the highway here in Banff National Park.
Wildlife crossing structures are fairly common in some parts of the world, particularly in Western European countries like the Netherlands, but there are relatively few in North America, and the success of the Banff crossings has encouraged similar projects in the United States, like this rendering of an overpass being built in Washington State. And in 2012, the Wyoming Department of Transportation built an overpass that reconnected an ancient migration route of the pronghorn antelope. So if these crossings are improving safety and restoring habitats, why aren't they?
So what that cut short was, he says, why weren't they installed more often? Now, there is a bit more to that video, and I recommend you check it out on YouTube. The link's kind of at the bottom right-hand side of the previous screen. But hopefully that provides you with a bit of an insight into the scale of the problem we have with wildlife vehicle collisions. This also highlights how wildlife fencing and wildlife crossing structures are a great way to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions and also ensure that habitats remain connected. If you're paying attention, you should have seen them kind of briefly mention that fencing is a key component to helping to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, and also ensure that any wildlife crossing structures are effective. Now, without the use of fencing to guide animals to wildlife crossing structures, the likelihood of the structures being found is very low. And in the video, they mentioned that fencing in one study has been shown to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions by 50%. But other data shows that when wildlife fencing is used in conjunction with wildlife crossings, this number is actually as high as 92%. So just to reiterate, installing wildlife fencing and wildlife crossing structures on roads can reduce wildlife deaths that could lead to species declines. They can reduce wildlife vehicle damage, reduce vehicle damage and insurance costs as a result of a wildlife vehicle collision. And they can reduce human fatalities and injuries. As I said, wildlife fencing can be used in isolation to keep animals off of roads, but this must be avoided. Any project considering wildlife fencing must include wildlife crossings to retain connectivity for animals across their habitat ranges. Unfortunately, when scientists or the media typically talk about wildlife connectivity projects, they often focus a lot more on the impact of the crossing structure and rarely mention the importance or significant role the wildlife fencing has played in that crossing success. Now, this is the key inspiration for our webinar today, and we want to shine the light on the spotlight on wildlife fences and help ensure that any future projects that include this as a mitigation tool are well informed and able to install the best fences possible. There are a lot of great wildlife fences installed across the world, but there are also a lot of bad fences, and we're going to jump right in to help you understand how we can fix that. Now, the photos on this slide show a variety of different fences that have been installed across North America in recent years. And although each project has had its own unique challenges to overcome, they all share the common purpose and goal of preventing animals from getting onto a road. Just a reminder, although we're focusing on fencing applications for small animals, as I said earlier, the principles we're going to discuss and explore also apply to fences for large animals. Now, learning from bad examples. Now, these are all photographs of fencing that have been used across the world to supposedly protect wildlife. Now, you can quite clearly see that none of these materials seem fit for purpose, but yet each one would have been specified with the intention to control animal movement. Now, each design and material choice may have been originally chosen with the very best intentions, but we've learned over time that what was once thought to be a good idea had proven to be ineffective, and we need to start paying attention to animal behavior and basically installing better fences. Unfortunately, many of the materials pictured here are actually still being used today, either in both temporary or permanent projects. And to be quite frank and quite blunt, it's not good enough, and something needs to change. So fencing for wildlife is such a unique thing and needs to be treated with the appropriate care and attention to ensure that it does its job that it's been designed for effectively. Now, although each of those previous fence examples were predominantly fences for reptiles and amphibians, people actually argue that these small animals are not a risk to drivers, but that is incorrect. The small animals pose a huge risk to drivers, as many people actually stop along the roadside to help turtles, and also many drivers swerve to avoid hitting them, which can also cause collisions. Now, there isn't much data on the impact of small animals on wildlife vehicle collisions at the moment, as roadkill itself is actually a massively underreported data set. But some of these images here kind of speak for themselves, particularly the one on the right with a prime example of somebody stopping on the road to help a turtle across, and obviously the other ones just showing the kind of typical images you may have seen looking at larger animals and collisions. And basically what this highlights is that we need to ensure fences for all animals, big and small, work, and they do what they're designed for. And ultimately that is to make sure animals don't get on the road. So just to recap, and actually add a couple more hard-hitting facts that are a direct result of not keeping animals off of roads. 440 human fatalities, again, during the survey or the questions at the start, per year as a result of wildlife vehicle collisions on roads. The average cost of a wildlife vehicle collision is estimated at just over $9,000. And the total annual cost, as mentioned in the video, of wildlife vehicle collisions annually in the USA at a whopping $8 billion. So how would you go from having no fencing or effective mitigation for wildlife vehicle collisions to having a complete successful system that saves both animal and human lives? Well, the first thing you need is data. Now, data drives roadside mitigation. Without any data of what animals are being hit and where they are being hit, we don't have any reason to mitigate. Collecting the wrong data can also lead to incorrect mitigation measures being implemented or lead to having good mitigation put in the wrong place. So to put it simply, the most basic types of data you need to collect to understand if action needs to be taken is, first off, species data, information on their biology, distribution, migration, and vulnerability status on a local level and national as well. Then it's wildlife vehicle collision hotspots. Where are animals getting hit? What are the animal deaths per mile, proximity to important habitat, and the affected species, etc. Now, how you collect or obtain this data? Local animal knowledge, distribution, and biology may be down to local data sets and surveys, and local biology should always be consulted to lead on this aspect. When it comes to wildlife vehicle collision data, there are many different ways that this can be collected. For example, some DOT maintenance staff may just use a pen and paper to collect data, and their protocol may only then require them to note the animal and the location, whereas others may use a mobile application that captures lots of data points in one go and saves a lot of time. Efforts have been made and continue to be made to standardize the data points that should be collected for wildlife vehicle collisions. This is to ensure that data is easily comparable on a national and international scale. But ultimately, if you're working on a project, whatever data you can collect is going to help. Now, we are seeing an increasingly where data is increasingly being collected and reported by members of the public, which are also known as citizen scientists. They typically tend to use mobile applications such as Tracks. Now, this new citizen science movement is fantastic, and it helps to highlight wildlife vehicle collision hotspots and then pinpoint locations that professionals can investigate in more detail and evaluate if there is a need to mitigate. Now, I just mentioned Tracks, and Tracks is a mobile app that we have developed in partnership with researchers across the world. And the idea behind this app is to help make roadkill reporting easier for both the public and professionals. What makes this application different than other traditional wildlife sighting apps is that this is specifically designed for the purpose of safely reporting wildlife vehicle collisions. Any data you collect using this app can be downloaded and added into any other data sets you may already have. Data sets of collisions may already being documented by people within your area or departments of the transport. so basically to help all of you get on the road to gathering data if you're at the very start of a project, or even if you're kind of halfway through and continuing to kind of gather data on ongoing projects, we recommend downloading Tracks by either kind of scanning the QR code here, which will take you to links on the Google Play Store, or you can also access it via tracksapp.info. And here's just an example of Tracks in action during some of our initial kind of beta testing from a couple of years ago. Now, between June and July of 2021, 124 records of diamondback terrapin carcasses were recorded along Highway 80 in Tybee Island in Georgia. Now, this was during just 9 surveys of the roadway. Quite shocking and staggering, to be quite honest. But we are waiting for an update on the plans for mitigation for this project and this stretch of road. But this just gives you an example of how much data can be gathered in such a short space of time using mobile applications like this. So now we have the data. We need to gain the support of stakeholders to help allow a project to progress and also help us to unlock funding. But again, with some participation from you folks, we want to know, who do you think are the key stakeholders and project advocates, that help to bring a project to life? So you should be able to return to, if you participated earlier, on the original link and code, and this will basically generate, it'll give you the option to input some words, and what we should hopefully see on here is a bit of a word cloud emerge, just to kind of to show us who you think the key stakeholders and project advocates are that help bring a wildlife fencing and wildlife crossing project to life. So we have state highway engineers as the first answer. Unfortunately, I don't have any prizes for the first answer, but I do appreciate whoever got in there first. So we'll just let this run for a minute or so. Conservation organizations, local residents and citizens matching up there. Conservationists, I guess good fill. There we go. Citizens, state, planners, biologists, tribes.
This is so cool, Steve. I know that we've had terrapin fatality issues on the Eastern Shore, and I don't know if you guys are involved with that project, but I know I've had some people reach out to me about some work on a highway that has a lot of terrapin crossings as well.
Yeah, well, I think the thing we're seeing is this. We've been aware of this problem obviously for quite some time, but it's growing and people being more aware, and I think people feeling like they are empowered and able to do something about the problems that they're seeing. You know, particularly you see a lot of what's mentioned here. You kind of got citizens has come up there really, really bold. As we see this approach, you either have a really switched on and passionate government agency that drives mitigation from the top down, or you have local residents who have spotted the problem and then they put the pressure from the ground up, and then you kind of have these different bits that meet in the middle. So here we have motorists, again, falls under kind of citizens, residents, again, local DOT, DOT. This is looking cool. So we've got 16 people I think you should be able to add multiple responses. Land trust, landowners is a good one. Naturalists, okay. Okay, that looks good. So on this next slide, we should see an awful lot of matches, hopefully. So again, thank you for your answers. So in an ideal scenario, the road agency or road owner will fill the role of the project advocate, as well as being the ones to identify the problem, gather the data, and then fund, implement, and maintain the mitigation. So you have a stakeholder and an advocate all in one. Perfect scenario. But unfortunately, this isn't always the case. So in many situations, there is an advocate who kind of feels the the role and is the person or group of people who recognize there is a problem, and then they start to gather data. These advocates then work to get the attention and support of people with power, and normally money, such as the road agencies and any other key figures. Now, that may include wildlife agencies, private donors, both local or national government offices, and so on. And then collaboratively, advocates and stakeholders can work together in collaboration to develop a project and carry it through to the end. And here's just a few pictures and examples of people collaboratively and working together to successfully implement some wildlife fencing and crossing projects. The top one in Georgia and the second one there in New Jersey. So again, I ask for some more participation from you. Once you have support of the stakeholders and you have your advocates, how do you think a project could be funded? So please, once again, just join us back on Slido. And I promise this is the last time we'll ask you to get involved with all the Q&A, and then you can kind of kick back and relax for the rest of the presentation. Grants in there first. So please let us know how you think the project could be funded. For those of you who may have come in late and didn't sign up to this later, you can either scan the QR code on your mobile device using your camera, and it should come up with a little link for you to click and access and input some words, or using your internet browser, you can go to slido.com and then enter that number. So we've got grants, government, taxpayers, and just say obviously the bigger numbers are the ones that people have said multiple times. So grants probably been said by a few participants, taxpayers, donations, we have the government, transportation budget and federal DOT funds falls under government, non-profit organizations which may sit with donations or grants depending on their funding streams. Again, municipal and county funds, gas and toll taxes, federal funding, state highway admin. A lot of focus on the government putting their hands in the pockets to pay for this. Got NRCS coming up a couple of times there. Landowners again. Highway toll funds coming in again. Okay. Oh, there's one more participant typing. We'll let them get their answer in. So again,
Go ahead.
so thanks again, yeah, for all your answers there. As we all know, roadside mitigation doesn't come for free. So where does it come from? And as quite a lot of you actually kind of pointed out, I think we pretty much hit every single one of those bullet points there. Grants was obviously the big one, but you could get a government grant as well as you could get grants from other pots of money. But as you can see, there is a wide variety of ways that projects can be funded. And on any given project, there may be a mixture of sources that are all contributing to that fund or that project. We advise that you investigate any opportunities to gain financial support for a project. It may seem obvious, but obviously the more money you have, the more opportunities and flexibility you have for how your project is executed. Obviously, this basic list gives you a good place to start, but it's not everything. And depending on where you are, what species you're working with, or what type of organization you are, it may open you up to different funding opportunities. So, for example, a non-profit organization may be open to different funding opportunities than a private landowner. So this is where your data and your collaboration with partners and stakeholders will help. Collaboration, and I can't stress this enough, collaboration is key, and the more people you have on board, the better. So presenting your data that you gather to appropriate organizations and agencies can obviously prompt action, establish these partnerships, and then hopefully lead to unlocking funding. We just have some images here on the right-hand side as an example from a project in Canada with the Royal Botanic Gardens, where on this around this Esso petrol station, they'd identified there was an awful lot of hatchlings, the turtles being killed, and there was a fence that was there, but it was the chain link fence. They obviously saw recognized the hatchlings were kind of either getting through or underneath the chain link fence, and then they approached us to kind of help design and supply some material to stop that happening. And this was kind of orchestrated by the Royal Botanic Gardens as a kind of non-government organization, and then they had a whole host of volunteers that actually helped to install the fence. And I can't show you all the photos from this project, but some really kind of wholesome and heartwarming photos of people spending a couple of days out together, kind of digging the trench and attaching, retrofitting this barrier to the chain link fence. So before we move on to the importance of fencing design, I just wanted to share some specific funding sources available within the USA. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's some good places to start. By all means, take a picture of the slide, but please don't hesitate to reach out after this presentation. As part of Steve and myself approach and our colleagues is to work with people to help them understand and unlock funding for any projects that they may be working on or looking at to implement wildlife fencing. Now, moving on to design and installation, and really the kind of big question about what makes a good wildlife fencing design. Now, often this is the aspect of a project where things fall down, as fencing, as we've mentioned before, can be overlooked. And despite people's best intention, the design, the materials, and the installation of a fence might not always be as good as it could be. Now, luckily, there is a growing awareness and resources out there to help mitigate this. And we hope that obviously this webinar is one of those. We're going to start off this section by highlighting some key factors that you should consider, and then leave you with some tools to take away and implement. Now, what makes a good wildlife fencing design? This is not everything that needs to be considered, but we believe that these 4 key factors will get you on the right track to implementing better wildlife fencing. And we'll go into each of these in more detail on the following slides. But first off, we will look at location. If you don't know the best location for your fence, then you need to. And your initial data will help make sure you put it in the right place. Secondly, materials. Now, there are different materials you can use to make your fence, and understanding what works best for your scenario is key. So, for example, solid fences have been proven to be better than transparent ones when guiding animals. We will then look at dimensions. Now, as the height and configuration of a fence can vary, different heights and shapes of fences can actually be better for different species and settings. So unfortunately, there is no one size fits all. So using the right height for the right species is really, really important. And then finally, in this section, we will look at installation. Because ultimately, if your fence doesn't get installed well, then it's not going to work. And it's as simple as that. So you can gather as much data as you want. You can get all the support you need, have all the money in the world. But if it's installed badly, then it's not going to protect people, and it's not going to protect any wildlife. So first off, location. Now, as I said, if you don't know the best location for your fence, then you need to. And this is where your initial data will help with your planning. So fencing location takes into account a variety of things. Now, a good starting point is using your wildlife vehicle collision data along with your local species distribution and behavioral knowledge, because if you put a fence in a place where animals are not being hit or don't exist, then this could be a big waste of time and money. Then you need to look and consider roadside zones. Now, some roadside zones are key habitat areas for wildlife. So, for example, many turtle species use roadside embankments for nesting. If the fence location does not include these important habitats, then you could be adversely excluding or hindering species' ability to reproduce without even realizing it. Different road agencies also have different clear zone requirements for what can be put next to the road, and considerations should always be made to see if adjustments can be made to existing guardrails or fences in the right of way to make sure if they could be more suitable for wildlife when appropriate. And this could save you an awful lot of time and money, especially in wetland areas where there isn't a lot of kind of embankment or roadside area to work with. Thirdly is looking at the length of fence. How much fence do you need? and how far does it extend in each direction on the roadside. Now, this aspect is often hindered by budget, but it should always be based on your data to ensure the fencing covers enough of an area to exclude and direct wildlife appropriately. You also, if you don't need a lot of fencing, then you don't need to spend the money on that. And finally, unfortunately, fences have to come to an end. So ensuring there are adequate turnarounds or terminations of the fence to a crossing structure is important. In the event that a fence does not come to an abrupt end, or does come to an abrupt end, sorry, one-way escape features should be added so that in the event of an animal making its way onto the road at the end of a fence, it is able to escape as quickly as possible. So you know where your fence is going to go. What materials do you use? So there are different materials you can use to make your fence, and understanding what works best for your scenario is key. As we mentioned earlier, unfortunately, there are a lot of materials that are used for wildlife fencing that are really just not up to the task. And many of these materials are typically mesh made from either plastic or metal and have not been designed specifically for the purpose of excluding animals. Now, many of these materials are designed for other construction purposes and have just historically been selected because they're cheap and easy to get hold of. So some of these suboptimal materials include hardware cloth, wire reinforced silk fencing, and plastic mesh, as you can see here on the left-hand side. More optimal materials include solid or opaque materials that are typically made up of kind of metal or recycled plastics. And as I said earlier, there is a growing evidence that solid or opaque barriers are best, as it provides a sensory barrier to wildlife and not only prevents them from interacting with the fence by potentially scratching and climbing, but it actually helps encourage movement and actually directs them to crossing structures faster than highly transparent materials such as mesh. You should also consider the durability of your fence, and I can't stress this enough, because you need to ensure that it's going to withstand specific impacts, particularly like vegetation maintenance, and if it is an issue in your area, snow loading, because lightweight materials may be cheap, but they aren't going to last very long. And obviously, like anything we've shown during this webinar, if you have any questions or would like advice on what materials may be suitable for a project that you're working on, then please do reach out, and we will be sharing our contact details at the end. Now, as part of your design, you need to consider dimensions. So as I mentioned, the height and design and the configuration of a fence can vary, as different heights and shapes of fences can be better for different species and scenarios. Now, there are various resources out there that provide details and recommendations on this. This table on the left is actually from the 2021 Caltrans Measures to Reduce Road Impacts on Amphibians and Reptiles in California, Best Management and Technical Guidance document. Quite a mouthful. But you can see that they make recommendations for different heights for different animals, and they even recommend different heights for different size animals of the same species group. Now, in a few slides' time, we will share a link to a handbook that we have made that pulls together a lot of different references like this, and then provides clear recommendations for different species, along with drawings and information that you can use to plan and execute and maintain your project. Now, once you've worked out the height of your fencing, then you need to consider implementing these two important fence features. Now, these are an anti-climb and anti-dig lip. Now, although the fence material you select should not be able to be climbed by your target species, as this is a lot of the problem with kind of mesh and geotextile materials, having the addition of an anti-climb lip only provides further protection from animals being able to climb over the top. Now, there are a few shapes that are commonly recommended, and the size could also vary depending on the size of the animal. You know, if we're talking much larger animals or bears that can climb, a 4 to 6 inch lip might not be adequate. But typically for small animals, targeting kind of reptiles and amphibians in particular, an anti-climb lip measuring about 4 to 6 inches that extends away with a downward facing element is a good place to start. Secondly, another key feature to include that's actually perhaps more important than the anti-climb lip is actually an anti-dig lip. Now, one of the biggest differences between wildlife fencing for smaller animals compared to larger animals is that smaller animals typically encounter the fence at a ground level. And if the fence is not buried below the ground, animals will be able to get underneath it and then onto the road. Particularly, again, animals like salamanders and snakes will also use gaps or openings in the ground to try and climb under. So ensuring the bottom of a fence is buried at least 8 inches below ground with a minimum of a 4-inch folded anti-climb lip in the direction that animals will encounter the fence will help ensure nothing is able to burrow under. So I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here, but it's just highlighting sites being encountered by animals. On the previous slide, we had a kind of a friendly turtle there to illustrate an animal. And then finally, installation. So if your fence does not get installed well, then it is not going to work. As I said, you can gather as much data as you want, get all the support you need, have all the money in the world, but if it's installed badly, then it's not going to protect people or wildlife. Now, luckily, contractors are becoming more and more aware of fencing for wildlife, but this is still a new thing. So always assume that the contractor has never installed a fence like this before and provide as much information, supervision, and support as you can to them. Most contractors are used to installing fencing for humans and not fencing for wildlife, let alone when we're looking at reptiles and amphibians and smaller animals, many of them haven't even seen or sadly might not even care about these animals. So anything you can do to educate the contractor about the target species may just help them to kind of go the extra mile. Now, this list here, and as this kind of video plays in the background, is not a complete list of things that need to be considered during installation, but they are things that we believe will help to make a significant difference. Now, the first thing is start at the wildlife crossing and work backwards. When the goal of your wildlife fence is to guide animals to a crossing structure, then you need to make sure that this connection is perfect. Often contractors treat the wildlife crossing structure as the kind of endpoint and will install fences kind of building up to this as the finish line. The only problem is that as the job comes to an end, so does enthusiasm, and people often want to get the job finished. Sometimes material supplies may be running low. If this happens, your animals could be guided all the way to the crossing structure only to find a gap, and then you could end up with roadkill right where your wildlife crossing structure is. Marking the fence line. Knowing where your fence is going to go may sound really obvious, but you need to mark it out. The location of fencing is often determined by an engineer on a plan drawing, but often what looks good on a plan doesn't always line up on site. So obviously you need to just make sure and check and make any adjustments you need before you start breaking ground. Then once you know where your fence is going to go, you need to clear the vegetation. So try not to clear more vegetation as you need, as quite often these areas are sensitive habitat for wildlife. So only clear what you need for any personnel and machinery working on the project. Often, some of the areas you will install wildlife fencing can also be challenging, so you may have to use a variety of different machinery or hand tools. Now, a key aspect to make sure fencing works really well is making sure the trench is even and level. Spending time to do this now will make it easier when you start to put in fence material. And also, don't dig a trench to bury the fence and fold the anti-dig lip any bigger than you need to. Again, remember this habitat is sensitive, and it will also make backfilling more difficult if you have a big hole to fill with earth. It may seem obvious, but when installing the fence material, also make sure there are no gaps. When you overlap a section, make sure there are no gaps. Animals can get through gaps, so make sure there are no gaps. And then finally, when everything is installed in the right place, all you have to do is backfill the trench, and then all backfilling should be compacted on both sides of the fence. And this will minimize any holes or openings in the ground that animals may be able to get under. Remember, small animals will encounter the fence at ground level, so paying close attention to this is really, really important. We do have some step-by-step guidance and also some videos that you can see playing on in the background here that we'll be updating as resources to help people. And again, if you have any concerns or would even like us to provide advice or training to contractors, then please let us know. And as I mentioned, there are various guidance tools and recommendations out there, but some of them are vague, they're out of date, not applicable, or just downright difficult to find. To make life easy for people all over the world, we have put together this wildlife fencing guide. Now, this is a comprehensive tool designed to enable you to plan, design, implement, and maintain the best wildlife fencing for your project. This exists predominantly as a digital document, which allows us to update it as soon as new information becomes available. And we have actually got version 2 due to be published later this year. Right now, version 1 can be downloaded, and it's also available in a physical copy. If you'd like to download it, please scan the QR code on your mobile device, or you can just simply visit wildlifefencing.com. If you do want a physical copy, please just let us know your address, and we will send one out to you. Or if you want a few, we can send a couple. The idea behind this document is to ensure that everyone working on a project has well-informed reference, drawings, and guidance at every stage of the project, from planning right through to implementation and maintenance and beyond. Now, this may start with a biologist who has identified the need and wants to specify a fence as the advocate we touched on earlier. This same information that they use from this document, this fencing guide, can be used by an engineer to plan and design. It can then be added to tender documents for contractors to bid to be able to kind of install the mitigation. And then it can be used during those contractors to guide their installation methods. And then it can also be picked up by the kind of the owners or adopters of these fences and crossing structures to be used as a reference for maintenance for years to come. Now, historically, many project advocates have had limited guidance, and therefore details within reports and project documents are vague. And this has kind of been open to be interpreted during the life stages of a project. And then this often leads to problems, as I previously mentioned, such as raw materials being implemented or chosen, bad installation, poor maintenance, and so on. So the aim is that this guide helps to fill that gap and will hopefully increase the potential for long-term effective wildlife fences being installed for wildlife across the world. So we really do hope you find it useful. And we also really kind of value your input and feedback, because any projects that you may have been involved in, if you've learned something from that, then that's something that everybody should know, and that's something we can include as case studies and input into what is included here. Now, finally, just moving on to our last section, which is maintenance and monitoring. If you have followed all the previous steps closely, then this should significantly reduce your maintenance requirements. However, no wildlife fence is maintenance free, unfortunately. Now, preferably all inspections and maintenance works should be incorporated into a right-of-way maintenance activity, and the training should be given to all staff to make sure they kind of understand the nuances of working within these unique wildlife fences. Now, it all starts with an annual walkover inspection. Now, this could be conducted following vegetation clearance or done at the same time. For all permanent fences and semi-permanent fences, we recommend a walkover in the spring or soon after the thaw in areas with heavy snowfall, and that's followed by additional visits to conduct additional vegetation maintenance as required. For vegetation clearance, we suggest 1 or 2 cuts every year on both sides of the fence and give priority to the side encountered by animals. Using a weed whacker with wire and not a blade, or a mower in close proximity to a fence is great. Close gaps. If you find any gaps in the fence I mentioned before, tighten or add additional fasteners to prevent potential for animals to go through. Look for fixed broken fasteners. Replace any broken fasteners you find. Consider upgrading them to a longer lasting material if a problem persists. For example, heavy duty plastic zip ties don't often last as long as manufacturers claim. Inspect the crossing connections, as I've said before. Perfect tie-ins with wildlife crossings are vital. Ensure nothing has become unstuck and debris or damage has occurred to hinder these connections, as this may result in animals being able to get onto the road. You've got washout and scouring by replacing any backfill, and consider digging drainage channels or manually adding additional drainage holes into the fencing. The scouring and things not fixed, again, wildlife could get under the fence and onto the road. And then finally, kind of repairing damage. If sections of fencing are damaged beyond repair, for example, from a vehicle collision, sections can be cut out and replaced at required intervals, and it may be advantageous to have a small amount of fencing material in storage, so repairs can be made quickly, and this will avoid prolonged periods where there is no fence in place, leaving wildlife and people obviously vulnerable. Now, before we open up for questions, I just wanted to touch on the importance of monitoring. Ultimately, if we don't know if our wildlife fencing and wildlife crossing structures are working to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions and provide connectivity opportunities for wildlife, how do we know it's having an impact, or even if we need to change anything? If it's working, then great, but could it be better? If it's not working, and we need to not be afraid to adapt, we need to find out why it's not working and then make those necessary adjustments. Essentially, you want to continue monitoring the wildlife vehicle collisions the same way you did prior to implementing your mitigation. And this will give you a kind of clear before and after data set that can be compared to assess the impact. Your routine fence inspections will also help you identify if there's anything wrong with your fence materials, your design, or your installation. And you can then plan to make any adjustments going forward. And our final point, I did say our final point, but this is really a final point. Before we open up for questions, is don't be afraid or forget to share your story. Now, there are so many other people out there that can learn from what you have done or are planning to do, so don't be shy. Here's just a few good news stories that shout about the positive impacts of wildlife fencing and crossing structures, but it's also the not so good stories that are just as important. Every project provides an opportunity to learn something new, and if we're all open and honest, then together we can learn and ensure better wildlife fencing and mitigation is implemented across all transport networks. So thank you again. I hope you found this really useful. Please feel free, as I said, to reach out to Steve, myself, and some of our other colleagues with our contact details here. Just to quickly recap what we've looked at today. We looked at why wildlife fencing is used and how this can help to significantly reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, especially when using in conjunction with wildlife crossing structures. We then explored the importance of data collection and how you can collect data and use it to inform any roadside mitigation. We identified who key stakeholders could be on a project and then touched on ways that we could obtain funding. We looked at important considerations that should be made when designing and installing your wildlife fence. And then we finished up just then with highlighting the importance of maintenance and monitoring to assess what impact your mitigation may be having. And that's it. So thank you.
Wow, thank you, Steve. That was really great presentation. I learned a lot. Great videos. I really appreciate. Thank you, Kelly, for sharing the YouTube videos of y'all's permanent installations. We did have one question came through from Charlie Sager. Hi, Charlie. Hope you're doing well. She asked, is there a way to, on the app, the Tracks app, is there a way to distinguish incidents, or can multiple data points represent the same roadkill scene? How do you and other researchers account for that and avoid inflating data? Like if you have repeated additions from multiple people. Oh, you're muted, by the way, Steve. Sorry. And anybody else, please feel free to drop questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. I'm watching them both, and we can keep answering questions. Go ahead.
So that's a great question, because if you have a carcass on the road that, you know, if it's there for a couple of days or even a couple of hours, you have a chance where that's going to be recorded by multiple people. Obviously, having those records is fantastic. It then comes to the point of analysis. So taking that point and thinking, you know, if we have multiple records around the same kind of time frame, is that the same carcass? Are we considering something else? Really, the tool at that stage using the app is kind of highlighting the problem. And then we have this Citizen Science kind of data set that's kind of collecting the number of people that have seen something. And then what a good is, then you can send in and do more controlled studies where you're like, okay, these people are this person, they are going to monitor it for a set period of time. And during that set period of time, we can 100% confirm that is this number of individuals. And then obviously this app enables people to kind of use it on kind of either scale or both sides of that. So I hope that answers that question for you, Charlie.
Great. Yeah, I would think also you could probably look at the data and see if things are all coming in around the same time, or a period of all coming in at one day at the same location. You can probably aggregate them within a certain time frame. Great.
Yeah, and we've kind of designed a tool to be the data collecting aspect. You know, we don't typically independently do the data analysis ourselves. We will then work with local agencies or partners or advocates and stakeholders to kind of process that data and interpret it how they may want to or need to.
Right. Cool. Anybody else, feel free to drop questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I know I'm curious a little bit. We didn't touch too much on like deer fencing, and since deer are a big issue around in Maryland, I have seen there are some relatively large fences over on the eastern shore along some waterways, and I suspect they're for either sick deer or white-tailed deer. Could you have any sort of just high-level thoughts about managing deer crossings with fencing and things like that?
I think the thing is, again, what we're seeing more and more of, and I touched on it, is the kind of the visual barrier. So a lot of our speciality and where we kind of started within this kind of wildlife fencing world is from the reptile and amphibian area, but we've been installing a lot of fences that we've seen when they've been monitored, larger wildlife have kind of come across against these kind of solid barriers, and then their behaviors completely changed. Some of the most striking, and on completely other side of the world in Australia, is we installed a fence for bandicoot, kind of real small rodent-like creature, and a species of snake. But the fence has guided ducks, koalas, echidna, just this whole list of species to this crossing structure. And you see we've set up cameras of, typically in the crossing, but also looking along the fence line. And you just see the behaviors of like a wombat coming up to the fence and then just going, it seems like they're going, well, can't see it, can't go over it. I'm just gonna have to go that way. And then they just walk. So I think what we'd like to see, and we're looking into locations. So maybe if you have a location, to actually actively put some more visual barriers on existing deer fencing and then monitor to actually see what impact this has. Because I think, ultimately, if an animal really wants to get somewhere, it's going to try. And, you see, particularly with deer, they sometimes get entangled in the fence, and then that causes a whole problem itself. That then might cause to the fence being down, and then you have an opening where deer can just get on the road for untold length of time.
Right. Yeah, from our work at our research stations where we have agricultural research going on, I've done enough research to know that the need for a deer fence is about 8 feet tall and with wire mesh. But yeah, the solid barrier would probably help enhance that, reduce it, even attempts to go through. We have Steve Mars shared. We have Steve, if you want to send that, I'll send that to everybody. But the Western Transportation Institute has a lot of studies on ungulates in 9 Western states and is published online. So if you look up Western Transportation Institute, you can find some more studies on larger ungulate fencing. This is a curious thing. I remember learning about this in graduate school, and I'm curious if you have run across this. Do predators ever start to learn about these crossings and sort of like stake themselves out at these kind of pinch points for other species and watch for them as an easy kind of kill zone?
Steve, do you want to take this? Not me.
You're muted, by the way, Steve.
Yeah, it's a good question. We have seen, with cameras that are set up in many of these crossings, both predators and prey using the crossings. The idea that they're keying in on these crossings, is an issue for biologists, when they're managing those specific animals. The thought, though, is if we didn't have those crossings, both of the prey and predators would be struck by the vehicles trying to do the crossings. And so what the thought was is, if they are keying in on those areas, the predators, we're still seeing, a lot more animals surviving those crossings than that would normally be lost, with the wildlife vehicle collisions. So it's, there's a couple road ecology conferences that talk specifically about a lot of the stuff that Steve presented today and some of the hard questions. Like, do we want to do, roadside pollination projects because the butterflies and bees will be struck by cars? So folks actually did study work to see what was the production off those right-of-ways and medians, before and after a pollination project. And so it was upwards of 20% of the animals that would be coming off those lands. The production of butterflies and bees would be hit by cars, but we started with zero production, and now we're getting 80% production off those areas. So these are really these are good questions that are being asked, but in the end, if we can maintain this habitat connectivity, we're actually, in spite of maybe some predator prey issues going on at the crossings, the amount of animals that are surviving those crossings well exceed what could be taken by, say, a mountain lion that is keying in on mule deer using those crossings.
Great. Yeah, no, good point. Great to hear. Yeah, I think sounds like the sort of overall benefits sort of dwarf the sort of negative impacts that you might have on some of these things. Yeah, great. Well, I don't see any more questions on the chat. We're 5 minutes over. Thank you guys so much for joining Steve and Steve. Maybe we'll have you back again if we have any other questions on this and a future time. Anybody else who's still on, please do feel free to email me or chat with me about ideas you'd like to have, other speakers, other topics you'd like us to cover in this speaker series. This will be up on YouTube. It's up right now. So thank you all for joining. I hope you learned something. I know I did. Thanks again to our presenters from Animex Fencing, Steve and Steve. I look forward to being in touch with you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for hosting.
Great afternoon.
Everybody have a great afternoon. Take care.